Yeah, haven't really looked back, actually.
Good on you, Harry. All the best for it. So we might get you a picture of Heather Roy's pirate vessel there. Hey, Jeanette says, Harry, thank you for being on. Clotheslines are not allowed in retirement villages, I understand. I might have to check that. Anton Matthews, Heather Roy, thanks so much for being on the program. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Wallace Chapman, back tomorrow, Tuesday afternoon, 3:45. Checkpoint next. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Now, Hideki nei, unvaccinated frontline workers could stay in some of the riskiest MIQ jobs for weeks because there's not enough jabbed workers to fill the gap. April 30 is the government's deadline for them to be immunised or moved on, but moved to where and who decides? We get some legal advice. Meanwhile, the Grand Millennium's closed to new guests pending an investigation into how COVID spread inside the hotel. The Māori Party's been referred to the police over undisclosed election donations. A monitoring device some diabetics are struggling to fund is handed out to lifestylers on retreat, and a new Māori-based justice facility promises results within a year. Now, don't forget, you can watch us live on Facebook.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata with DNA. The authorities don't know when the latest case to test positive for COVID-19 was earlier tested for the virus, despite workers requiring a test once every 14 days. The third community case is a security guard at the Grand Millennium Managed Isolation Facility in Auckland, who worked closely with another security guard who tested positive last week. Neither worker has been vaccinated. The MIQ head, Brigadier Jim Bliss, says they are worried that the latest case was not tested in accordance with the 14-day rule.
So we're showing that they weren't tested in the period that is under investigation for infection. The most recent test was the 8th of April, but they weren't tested in the period of investigation. We're still doing investigation into that and their testing regime.
The authorities expect to know by the end of this week when the person had an earlier test. More than 500 MIQ workers remain unvaccinated despite all being given the opportunity. The Prime Minister has confirmed there are 4,010 MIQ workers and 3,472 have been vaccinated. This leaves 538 unvaccinated. Jacinda Ardern says 81% of the 170 Grand Millennium workers are vaccinated, which means 32 are not protected. Any MIQ worker not vaccinated by the end of April will no longer be able to work on the front line. The President of the Māori Party says volunteers are to blame for its failure to declare more than $300,000 in donations. Donations above $30,000 must be declared to the Electoral Commission within 10 working days. The party received 3 donations above that threshold between March and October last year, but did not declare them until recently. The party has been referred to the police for the breach. Māori Party President Shea Wilson says volunteers misinterpreted the rules while learning the ropes.
We took over a party that had broken down, and as part of the rebuild as volunteers, when we got into the thick of the campaign, we misinterpreted how we had to report things, and so we reported them late.
Shea Wilson says the party is working to make sure the mistake isn't repeated. The Health Minister Andrew Little has dismissed calls for a major overhaul of drug laws, saying that would first have to go to a referendum. A host of health and social organisations have signed an open letter to the government asking for drug use to be treated as a health issue, not a criminal one. But Mr Little says the government must respect last year's public vote, which went against cannabis legalisation.
I would interpret it as, no, we're not quite ready for this level of liberalisation yet. Doesn't mean to say New Zealand won't be in the future. Doesn't mean to say New Zealand won't be in the near future. But I think it would benefit from more public debate and scrutiny.
Andrew Little says he believes the public would expect another vote after that wider discussion. Groups representing early childhood centres are wary of plans for a flying squad to investigate high-risk centres. They say there is a danger the Education Ministry unit will focus on minor problems with paperwork. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
The Ministry's reinstating the Provider Assessment Group, which made surprise checks on home-based early learning services over a 3-year period. The Early Childhood Council and Early Childhood New Zealand Te Rito Maioha, which represent early learning services, say spot checks are a good idea. But they warn the unit needs clear rules and should not punish providers for minor infractions. Early childhood advocates told RNZ the unit is urgently needed because too many centres are badly run. Ko John Gerritsen Tēnei.
A serious crash has closed State Highway 2 between the Hutt Valley and Wairarapa. The police say the crash between a motorcycle and a car happened about 2:30 today. One person was seriously injured and a helicopter was sent to retrieve them. The road between Kaitoke and Featherston north of Wellington is shut and is likely to remain so for some time. It's 5:04. Hideki Matsuyama hopes he's opened the floodgates to many more Japanese becoming major golf champions. He's become the first men's golfer from Japan to win one of the sport's major championships by winning the Masters at Augusta. Matsuyama started the final day with a 4-shot lead and held on to win by a single stroke as he felt the weight of a nation.
My nerves really didn't start on the second nine. It was right from the start today, and right to the very last putt.
The translated words of Hideki Matsuyama. Multiple gold medalists Sophie Pascoe and Cameron Leslie headline a 5-strong swimming team to represent New Zealand at the Tokyo Paralympics. Jessie Reynolds, Nikita Howarth and Tupo Neufi round out the squad. They are the first group of para-athletes to be announced. Highlanders assistant coach Clark Dermody says can see the benefit of extra time despite finishing on the wrong side of the first point game in Super Rugby Aotearoa. Damien McKenzie kicked a long-range penalty in the 85th minute to secure the Chiefs a 26-23 win over the Highlanders on Saturday night. Dermody says while the result was heartbreaking, he believes it's a good experience for the players.
I think it puts players in positions they're not normally under that pressure, and it gives them opportunity later on down the track, maybe test match, sort of playoffs, that sort of thing, World Cup finals, all that sort of stuff.
The Highlanders host the Blues in Dunedin on Friday night. That's the news.
The royal family speaks publicly about Prince Philip.
We've now heard in the past 48 hours from 3 of the Duke of Edinburgh's children. We heard from the Prince of Wales last night, and today we heard from Prince Andrew and from Prince Edward.
COVID case numbers spin out of control in India.
All these years, she never needed to go to a hospital. And when she did, I couldn't do anything for her.
And a volcano erupts in the Caribbean.
It was just darkness. Then you began to feel something hitting your skin. Ash.
Across the globe, Morning Report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland to Taranaki, including Taupo. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers. Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Rotorua, cloudy with occasional rain, becoming mainly fine tomorrow afternoon. For Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, a few showers about the ranges and 1 or 2 spreading further east. Rain in Gisborne for a time tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, fine spells, isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow afternoon. For Marlborough and Nelson, a few showers about western Nelson, spreading elsewhere tonight, possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon, then clearing. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland, rain with squally thunderstorms. Hail is possible, especially in Westland, clearing south of Hokitika later tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago, also Southland, scattered rain or showers becoming widespread and persistent about Otago and inland Southland tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, low cloud and rain at times. RNZ National at 7.5 past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora, this is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen Takawingwa. Tonight, there are more than 500 unvaccinated MIQ workers around the country. But despite the risks, they can stay working in managed isolation hotels until the end of the month. We'll also have details of the bus trips taken by a security guard infected with COVID. But first, the Māori Party's been referred to the police for failing to disclose more than $300,000 in donations. Any donation over $30,000 must be declared to the Commission within 10 working days of it being received. The Māori Party failed to do that and has been referred to police by the Electoral Commission. Shay Wilson is the Māori Party president and he joins me now. Kia ora, Shay, what's gone wrong here?
Yes, so as you said, we were late, and so we've got to work on our processes as a voluntary team to ensure that this doesn't happen again. And you know, it was through the mop-up when we were doing all of our final recording of the whole campaign for the Electoral Commission that we realised that we had done some mistakes. So we went up to the Electoral Commission and said, hey, this has happened, and we've worked with them to ensure that we follow the process.
Shay, I'd love to keep talking to you. Your phone line's a bit dodgy, so can you just maybe move your phone around a little bit, or just move from slightly where you are so we can keep chatting?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Thank you for that. What I just want to clarify, what I think you said was it was you that picked up the mistake and you went to the Electoral Commission. Is that right?
Yes. Well, we realised that we hadn't declared, and so we went to them to say, hey, this is an issue, and then they went through their process. And we had to fill out everything and go through the steps to make sure that we were compliant, and now they've put that inquiry toward the police.
What day or date did you exactly find out that you had done this wrong?
About 4 weeks ago. So we went to them then to try and work through this process.
And how did you discover it, Shay?
It was in the final returns that we worked it out. We hadn't declared this in time, so we just rang up and said, hey, this has happened. What do we need to do now? We've got a formal response, and so we've been working through things with the Electoral Commission since. So
who was in charge of donations? You're the party president, but whose responsibility was it to handle the donations?
Yeah, so everything finishes with me. But, you know, our team, we did it together, and, yeah, that's my mistake. So are you the person who signed any returns? So I signed the end of the final returns, so that's part of my job, so that's what I did. How could you miss this? How could you miss this? Because I had a quick look on the Electoral Commission website, and man, it's right there under the section under donations in bold type, really huge, front page. Parties must immediately report donations and loans over $30,000. It seems to be a pretty fundamental thing. How could you not be across it? Yeah, so as a voluntary team, in the middle of the election and the COVID stuff, we slipped up, so we've got to work through that now to make sure that we can follow processes going forward. When you say we, who do you mean? Because you said the buck stops with you. As a team. Well, it does stop with me, but as a team, we've got to tidy up all our processes to make sure that we can do things better in the future. You know, we left Parliament and had to rebuild again. And so this is part of the rebuilding, is to tidy up all of these processes to ensure this never happens again. There's some pretty significant sums in there that went undeclared. Aotearoa Te Kahu Limited Partnership. Who's that? Yeah, so that was given to John Tamihere, and so you'd need to talk to Aotearoa Te Kahu and John about that. So you don't even know who they are? Well, it came through John, so you know, we've just been working through all of those processes to get things tidied up as we go forward. So were you across the donations coming in or not? Well, we were across the donations that we knew about that came into our account, but then in this case we weren't across these, so we've had to work through to declare now. So are you saying that you were oblivious to that donation that came through? It was about $150,000, wasn't it? So John was able to secure that, and so we're working to make sure that we can do things better going forward. Well, John Tamihere's a pretty experienced politician. Did he not give you any advice? Or when you say we, was the we involving him? So the we is the executive, and as an executive, we were rookies to this game. And so we've realised where we've gone wrong, and that's why we went straight to the Electoral Commission once we realised that. So was John Tamihere, when he handed over or said that he had that donation, was he involved in the reporting of it? No. So this was all done by our team, and so we've made sure that we work it out we work it out as we go forward. Lots of other parties use volunteers as well, right? So yeah. Would you accept that that's not really an excuse for getting this wrong? Well, the fact is that we didn't realise what what had been done, and so that's our fault, and we've got to tidy up our processes going forward.
So what are the repercussions then for this mistake that you say you're going to wear?
Oh, well, we have to wait until the police get back to us, but it's all in the Act. So we've been going over all of that since then, and you know the Act as well. So, you know, we've got to just wait until the inquiry by the police is completed until we know what the next steps are.
Will you stay on as president of the party if it's found that you've acted inappropriately?
Can't comment on that until we know what the decision is and what the people want.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Shay Wilson, who is the Māori Party president, and as he indicated, the Electoral Commission has passed on an issue with not declaring donations, so that is now in the hands of the police. It is 14 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Unvaccinated workers could stay in some of the riskiest frontline jobs at MIQ for several weeks because there's simply not enough jabbed workers to fill the gaps if they're redeployed. The third worker to contract COVID-19 at the Grand Millennium in Auckland hasn't been vaccinated, nor has the security guard they caught it from. So the country's biggest MIQ hotel will be closed to any new returnees as the time ticks down to a vaccine deadline for those on the front line. Adam Jacobson reports.
Staff who refuse to get a vaccination may still be working for another 3 weeks before the government forces them into other roles. Director General of Health, Ashley Bloomfield, says having a conversation with these workers is going to be a priority.
Those people would be at the head of the queue to be having a conversation with their employer about redeployment, but they won't have been required to be redeployed yet. The end date for that was always envisaged to be the end of April.
It's because moving that number of staff off the front line would have a knock-on effect.
Well, there's a very good practical reason for this, because you can't immediately withdraw 10 or 20% of your workforce and still run the facilities.
Head of MIQ Brigadier Jim Bliss says a rule change will come into place next month.
And it's our expectation that any worker that comes into work in one of our facilities will be vaccinated. And that's been the conversation with employers, both government employers and private sector, over late last week, setting our expectation for that to occur with effect the 1st of May.
Air 2 organiser Matt Danaher says it's important the remaining few weeks are used to address workers' fears and concerns.
Certainly it does make sense to redeploy people from high-risk areas if they can't be vaccinated. But at the end of the day, they've been working in these roles unvaccinated since the beginning of the outbreak, or since the beginning of the implementation of the MIQ system. And nothing's changed other than the vaccines become available.
While the union agrees all workers should be vaccinated by May 1st, any that haven't and need to be moved should be done so with no penalty.
We accept they may need to be redeployed, but it should be to work of equivalent value, so similar wages, similar hours of work.
The government and unions initially agreed on a 10-week window for frontline workers to get vaccinated or be moved to other roles. National's COVID-19 response spokesperson, Chris Bishop, wants all border workers who aren't vaccinated against COVID-19 to be removed from the front line immediately.
We've now come to the point where the rule should be if you're on the front line, you have to be vaccinated, and if you choose not to be, you can't work at the front line. It should be a pretty simple rule.
He says it's astounding unvaccinated staff will be allowed to continue working on the front line for the remainder of April. Ko Adam Jacobson, TNA.
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, says 86% of MIQ workers have received at least one vaccination dose so far. That leaves about 540 people still outstanding. She says from the 1st of May, those people will be removed out of their position unless they get a jab before then.
Our position has always been that from a certain date, those not vaccinated will need to be moved from the front line. That date was previously set as the 12th of April through to the 30th of April. That's why we've had a very deliberate strategy around ensuring every person working at the border in an MIQ facility has had the opportunity to be vaccinated before we start working through the process of those workers being redeployed. As Brigadier Bliss said at 1 p.m. today, the safety of our border workforce is paramount. They have sacrificed so much to do what they do for us, which is why we feel obligated to make sure that they are vaccinated and that we keep them safe. And that is why, as I said, from today onwards, if a border or MIQ worker is not vaccinated, their employers will need to consider alternative options for them. By the end of April, those not vaccinated will not be permitted to work in those high-risk workplaces and will be moved to other roles. And as I've said, that's a timeline that has been set out for some time.
That's the Prime Minister speaking there at her post-Cabinet press conference. And employment lawyers predicting there'll be legal action over COVID vaccination requirements for frontline workers. As you heard there, the Prime Minister says if they don't get vaccinated in the next 3 weeks, they'll be moved on. But moved on to where? And what if there's not a comparable job or conditions? And who is ultimately responsible? Employment lawyer Bridget Smith explains.
I would say that responsibility lies with the company, and unless the government makes it mandatory for the company to take particular action, then the company will just be left in a situation where it is trying its best to comply with the government's directions.
And what do you have to do in a situation like that? If you're the employer, what are your obligations to that worker?
Well, I have found it interesting over the last couple of days that the Prime Minister seems to be referring euphemistically to those employees being moved on. And I say euphemistically because it's not clear what moved on means. Does it mean moved on to another role, or does it mean moved on out of employment? For a contractor, slightly different rights to terminate a contract depending on what that contract provides. For an employee, you have the rights and protections of employees, and arguably the obligation for employees is going to be to redeploy. But then that raises the question, do these organisations have other roles that unvaccinated people can perform or not?
So potentially there will be people who lose their jobs.
Potentially there will, particularly I think in the case of contracted workers where someone isn't vaccinated and the company simply says, well, we're terminating your contract. And again, as I say, it will come down to the termination provisions of that contract, but if the company has a right to terminate on notice, then that's what they will do. And that's why there's always this tension between whether people are employees or contractors in terms of having the rights and protections of employees. So it becomes much more important in a situation like this.
Right. So in a situation, say, we're dealing with security guards in some of the cases here. There is some people who are doing contract work. They have less surety around being redeployed.
Yes, and their avenue potentially, if they say, well, look, the only reason we have our contract has been terminated is because we haven't been vaccinated, then they could potentially say we have been discriminated against. But that's going to depend on their reasons for not getting vaccinated and as I say, what the termination provisions of their contract are.
What are obligations around workers in terms of hours and pay conditions and like for like? If they decide to move you from a job that they consider to be at risk, where could you end up?
Well, that's going to depend on what the employer has available. But on the MB Employment New Zealand website, it very clearly states employers cannot require an individual to be vaccinated, but they can require a specific role be performed by a vaccinated person. So if you are an unvaccinated person, you may not be able to perform that role, in which case they will need to look at another role that they can have you perform if such a role exists. And then the other point is that employees shouldn't be unfairly disadvantaged. So I would be saying, look, if an employee is being moved in those circumstances, they should still have the same hours of work and rate of pay.
So what if you don't want to move and you accept that there is a risk from continuing to do the job you're in without being vaccinated? Can you do that?
The difficulty with that is it doesn't just affect you, it affects you and every other person that you come into contact with. And if it was just about you and the risk of an individual getting sick, then that would be a simpler issue, because you just say, well, personal responsibility, you went into it knowing the risks. But that would mean that person would have to be isolated from coming into contact with anyone else, and unless that is practicable, I don't think that is the answer.
How long do you reckon it is reasonable from a legal point of view to give someone to make a choice to be vaccinated or not?
Well, one of the questions people, I think, are rightly asking is, given some of these vaccines have been available since, I think, February, why is this still an issue when we're in April? Haven't we already reached that threshold? If there was an issue with the availability of the vaccine or people having time to get it, those would be factors to be taken into account. But I understand that the vaccine has been readily available for those people, so it is presumably some sort of ethical objection to obtaining the vaccine, in which case generally no amount of time is going to make a difference.
So do you reckon we're at the crunch point now in terms of making decisions about these people's ongoing employment?
Ongoing employment and ongoing contracting. I think the individuals in question need to be asked, is this a timing issue? Is this an availability issue? Or are you simply fundamentally opposed to being vaccinated? And if it is the latter, then the time doesn't make a difference, and actually just alternative arrangements need to be made.
Well, what liability is there on the employer if you believe enough time has passed for these people to be vaccinated, you don't know either way if they have or they intend to, and you leave them on the front line? If they were to get ill, what responsibility is on you for that from a legal point of view?
Well, under the Health and Safety at Work Act, employers owe an obligation to take all reasonably practicable steps to keep these employees and their colleagues and members of the public safe. So one of the first issues would be kind of what's being done in regard to PPE and masks and gloves and sanitizer and all of those things. How directly are they coming into contact? Are they in roles where they are, for example, receiving people straight off flights or driving a bus with people from the airport to an MIQ hotel? Those sorts of examples, you would expect there to be a potentially higher rate of exposure. Are there alternative roles that are similar but related, but with less contact, that they could be redeployed to? Those are the sorts of considerations. The employer will need to be able to argue or to prove that they have turned their mind to those risks and taken some practicable steps.
Bridget, talking to you, there seems to be a little bit of wiggle room here on both sides. So do you anticipate at some point that a case around vaccination and employment rights is going to end up in court?
Absolutely, I do. And the reason I think there is wriggle room is because it's not as simple as no jab, no job. An employer cannot require someone to be vaccinated, an existing employee or contractor. So there has to be a process or a mechanism for dealing with those people who are in existing roles.
Would it be possible to have a rule that is that simple? No jab, no job.
It would if the government ordered that everyone had to be vaccinated, and employers in certain industries may be able to say when they are hiring people that they are only hiring vaccinated workers. The lawfulness of that will depend on the nature of the work and the industry. But I think, for example, certainly in aged care or care for sort of early childhood, where you're working with people who are either at high risk or unable to be vaccinated themselves, that would appear to be reasonable.
And that was employment lawyer Bridget Smith there. And just an update on one of the COVID cases that stemmed out of the Grand Millennium Hotel, the managed isolation facility. This relates to the security guard who is called Case B, the worker who is infected with COVID-19. Now, this person has taken a number of buses, and Auckland Regional Public Health Service has put out a notification regarding those buses. So there's been 3 bus journeys taken by Case B. The passengers who were on the buses at these times are considered to be casual contacts, as the case sat away from others and apparently wore a mask, they say. Casual contacts need to watch for symptoms of COVID-19 and call the health line and get tested if they become unwell. Now, Auckland Transport is working with the Public Health Service to alert passengers who are on these buses. If you've got a registered HOP card with your contact details, then you should get an alert or be contacted by someone. There will be a COVID-19 Tracer app push notification as well for those who scanned the QR code on the buses. There's 3 buses taken over Easter and one other day on Monday, the 29th of March. Now, if you go onto the website for Auckland Regional Public Health, they'll be there, but also we'll get our team to put them up on our Facebook page or linked to them on our website, so you can check out the exact details of those bus journeys. Now, we're keen for your feedback this evening on anything you've heard on the program tonight. What do you think of the deadline for the end of the month for those frontline MIQ and border workers to get a vaccination or be moved on? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And we've got some traffic news as well. There has been a fuel spill on the Gibston Highway in Queenstown. The spill has caused several crashes so far, and police are advising people to avoid the area. Further north, a serious crash has closed State Highway 2 between the Hutt Valley and Wairarapa, and long delays are expected. The road between Kaitoke and Featherston, north of Wellington, is shut, and it's likely to remain so for some time. The transport agency Waka Kotahi says no detours are available and motorists should delay their journey, and the serious crash unit is on site there. The Health Minister, Andrew Little, has shot down calls for a swift overhaul of drug laws, saying any major change would first have to go to a referendum. A host of health and social organisations have signed an open letter to the government asking for drug use to be treated as a health issue, not a criminal one. But Mr Little says the government is constrained by last year's public vote, which went against cannabis legalisation. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
The letter landed this morning, a public missive with a united voice. Drug use should be a health issue, not a criminal one. The signatories number 25 and bring together those on both sides of last year's cannabis debate, among them the Medical Association, the Mental Health Foundation, and the City Missioners, the Drug Foundation. All want the 45-year-old Misuse of Drugs Act repealed and replaced. And all will likely be disappointed.
I think their gesture today is 12 months too late.
The Health Minister, Andrew Little, says his hands for now are tied. The government constrained by last year's vote on cannabis legalisation. It came back with 48.4% in support and 50.7% opposed.
I would interpret it as, no, we're not quite ready for this level of liberalisation yet. Doesn't mean to say New Zealand won't be in the future. Doesn't mean to say New Zealand won't be in the near future. But I think it would benefit from more public debate and scrutiny.
And that means no change right now. There's another hurdle too. The Minister says any significant overhaul of drug laws would first have to go to another referendum. He believes the public would expect that.
Having seen how these groups have come together now in this coordinated, more coherent way, I think those are the conditions in which actually, were we to run a referendum again, I think that, they might be more realistically hopeful of a different result. Certainly I would be, but I think that would be the way to go.
The response has the Green Party steaming. Chloe Swarbrick has been trying to build political consensus for decriminalisation. This morning, she told me her conversations with Labour had been very promising. But by this afternoon, that hope was dwindling.
It's just baffling. It seems like an absolute abdication of political responsibility.
The refusal to move is made more stark by Labour's commanding majority in Parliament. No longer can it claim New Zealand first as a handbrake. It has to own the decision to wait, even as its own reports from the Justice Review and Mental Health Inquiry recommend action.
There was a very narrow, very specific law that was shot down by a narrow margin. Of course, that means that law can't progress, but it doesn't mean that we stop talking about the issue, because the issue doesn't go away.
Tanya Sawiski-Mead is the director of Just Speak, an advocacy group which signed the letter. She says it looks like Labour has deemed the subject too politically risky and doesn't want to lose some of the voters it won over from National.
The fact that they are kind of refusing to engage on this because they don't have to, they perceive that they don't have to, is fundamentally disappointing. I think really out of step with the so-called compassion that I think this government has said that it wants to lead with.
As for when there might be the second referendum as signalled, Andrew Little is reluctant to name a timeframe. He does note it is not his top priority. Atu i te whare parimata mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Craig McCulloch hou.
And coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, health authorities scramble to find out how COVID spread between workers at an MIQ facility. The expensive diabetes device many can't afford being doled out by a wellness retreat. And we go inside a COVID ICU ward in India as daily cases reach a record high. As always, we would love to hear from you, so do send us your feedback on anything you've heard on the program tonight. Text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And standing by with the headlines is Susanna.
The authorities do not know when the third Grand Millennium COVID case had a previous test, despite border workers being required to take one every 14 days. The head of Managed Isolation and Quarantine, Brigadier Jim Bliss, says the latest case, another security guard at the Auckland hotel, had not been tested during the period of infection. The COVID-19 Response Minister, Chris Hipkins, is to make a testing register for mandatory for MIQ employers. One of the recent Auckland cases took 3 public buses in the city 2 weeks ago, and fellow passengers have been asked to watch for symptoms of COVID-19. The man took the 25L bus between Queen Street and Dominion Road on March 29th and the Saturday and Sunday of Easter weekend. The health authorities say other passengers are considered casual contacts. More than 500 managed isolation workers remain unvaccinated. The Prime Minister has confirmed that nearly 3,500 of the 4,000 MIQ workers have been vaccinated, but 538 have not been. MIQ workers have to be inoculated against the virus by the end of this month if they want to work on the front line. The Māori Party president has told Checkpoint the party did not know about a $120,000 donation from Aotearoa Te Kahu Partnership, which came through John Tamihere. The party has been referred to the police for failing to declare 3 donations amounting to $300,000 to the Electoral Commission within 10 days. President Shea Wilson says the party slipped up and is working to ensure the mistake is not repeated. The Health Minister says another referendum would be needed before any major overhaul of drug laws. An open letter to the government from a host of health and social organisations is asking for drug use to be treated as a health rather than a criminal issue. But Andrew Little says the government must respect last year's public vote, which went against cannabis legalisation reform. State Highway 2 between Kaitoke and Featherston, including the Rimutaka Hill Road, is closed due to a serious crash. Waka Kotahi says people are asked to avoid the area and delay their journey if possible. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen Takawingwa. And let's go to the business news now with Nona Peltier, who's joined me in the studio. Nona, well, is this a bit of a surprise? The chief executive of Sinalei Milk resigning, and what's the reason?
Yeah, it is a bit of a surprise because it was quite abrupt, and I don't think people saw it coming. The company he's only been in the job for less than 3 years. But you know, the last first half result that they published, I guess, last month was less than impressive. I mean, the company, was suggesting that they might just break even in the coming year. But, they had a drop of 76% on their first half over the year earlier, which is substantial. And the share price is also half what it was worth, a year ago. So neither of those readings are very positive for the company. And I guess against that background, I guess it seems that, that could be a reason why he left. There's no reason given in the market release that they put out this morning. In fact, they said with regret they had accepted his resignation, and they listed 11 of his achievements, none of which, of course, had anything to do with the bottom line or the share price. So, we'll have to see what happens there. Certainly, the market wasn't that impressed. The share price ended down 2%.
And I imagine there'll be some kind of search for a replacement.
Well, at the moment, John Pino, who was the former chief executive, he retired. Now he's taken the helm again. In the meantime, they're going to be looking for a replacement for sure.
Let's go to the travel industry. Now, I think this is interesting. They reckon, it may take a year to get up to speed. And I think to myself, weren't we told that last year? Really? Is that overambitious?
Look, I think that they were saying this is the bottom line. I think that it would take we've talked to a lot of experts who study this industry, and they're suggesting it could be 3 to 6 years before international travel returns to normal. So that would be, nothing like next year. And 2022, we don't know, but they're really hopeful that the government will not just open up a bubble with Australia, but also with the Cooks and perhaps also Fiji. Whether that happens, we don't know. But it does say in the story that we had today was that we had about 5,000 travel agents pre-COVID. We now only have 1,500. That's...
Sorry, say those figures again so I make sure I've heard them right.
That's right. We had 5,000 travel agents.
And now 1,500.
Yeah. So that goes to show you that really reflects the downturn in the industry. And you know what? That's 70% gone, basically. And so what's going to happen next, we don't know. But it's not just this, not just agents. It's a lot of different industries, hotels and, a number of businesses, souvenir shops, for example. One only needs to walk down Queen Street to see how many businesses have closed. There's empty shops all nearby where the cruise ships used to come. So it's not something that's going to happen tomorrow. A lot of things will need to happen before we see a return to business as usual for the tourism industry, for certain.
And what numbers do you bring from the market?
Interesting. We're down about 56%. So that's nearly 0.5%. And that's really in line with what we're seeing in Asia ahead of the corporate earnings seasons for the U.S. There's some concern about whether or not they're going to deliver to expectations. So people are taking a bit of a cautious approach there. The New Zealand dollar, so we're at 12,519. The New Zealand dollar is steady at 70.3 US cents, 92.5 Australian and 51.4 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier there with business news. A life-changing device that many type 1 diabetics can't afford is being handed out as a weight management tool by a wellness retreat. CGM devices monitor glucose levels for type 1 diabetics, but they're expensive. Pharmac has repeatedly been called on to fund the device for those who can't afford it, but hasn't budged on the issue. And as Louise Tanuth explains, while some in need go without, others are using it simply to diet.
At Aroha Retreat, you can rewild yourself in nature, elevate your body and mind, and after days of nourishing yourself from the inside out, leave rejuvenated and with a CGM to take home and track your diet. It's a device that's life-changing for type 1 diabetics, but one that's out of reach for many sufferers. It removes the need for them to test their glucose levels by pricking their finger several times a day. Corrine Coker from NZMS Diabetics, who distributes CGMs, explains how they work.
So it takes the reading from a sensor that you wear with a filament that sits under your skin, and then a transmitter on the back sends data to a receiver, either an insulin pump or your phone, every 5 minutes.
It's a round disc just bigger than a $2 coin that's stuck on a person's arm. It means the wearer can check their glucose levels at any time of the day with the use of an app and without the pain of a prick. The retreat's been using the CGM devices for the last few years, an extra available to visitors for another $200 on top of the $5,000 to $7,000 for their stay. Co-founder Damien Shaparo explains why.
It's quite cool because you can do a retreat, observe how your blood sugar behaves under great conditions, essentially, ideal diet and exercise routines. And then you leave here and you might eat whatever you eat and drink whatever you drink. Just some really good data.
There's a catch though. They cost up to $400 a month to run. Single mother of 2 Jess Barton can't afford one for her daughter Lily. She's relying on the kindness of friends to fund it.
So she absolutely loves the Libre, and we've had it now for just over 2.5 years. And basically the first 2 years has been funded by 2 different friends and family for us.
Lily's had diabetes for a decade. Now at high school, the device is her saving grace. But it's not even a full CGM. They've bought parts over time to create something similar, using an extension that allows Jess to look at Lily's levels on her phone.
For that one, it's $50 a week to run alone. Just the Dexcom on top of that, I think, is it's even double the price of what we are doing at the moment that we can't even quite fully afford. Yeah, it's just crazy how we wouldn't have even been able to do it without the help of our friends and family.
Sian Chapman's had type 1 diabetes for more than 20 years. But after separating from her husband, she can't afford the device. She's using an outdated version to cut costs, but supply is running out as new technology takes over.
I currently buy it from individuals from America who sell off their sensors cheaply. My supplies are running out from America and they're unable to be sourced anymore, so I've got the option of stopping using it or having to pay $5,000 a year. Just isn't really in the budget as a single mum.
Type 1 diabetes has no cure, and failing to manage it can lead to disability or death. After 23 years living with type 1 diabetes, Sian says the device is keeping her alive.
My biggest fear is just not waking up in the morning because I haven't woken up to a low blood glucose. Probably once a week my alarm goes off at night, wake up, treat, go back to bed. My hypoglycemia awareness is pretty low, so without the CGMS, there's a strong possibility that I just won't wake up.
2 years ago, Diabetes New Zealand launched a petition to get CGMs funded by Pharmac. It received about 28,000 signatures and was submitted to Parliament. They were supposed to attend a select committee last year in March. CEO Heather Very says a year later, there's still no update or communication from Pharmac on when the new date might be.
We are struggling to get in front of a select committee at the moment. We've had no update whatsoever. We've had a little bit of update from Pharmac just saying we're progressive, but not the CGM. But they are still very much down the bottom of the cliff.
And Pharmac couldn't say either.
The other one is yet to be reviewed.
That's Director of Operations Lisa Williams. She says funding applications are considered by experts and then ranked against other existing requests. These requests form a big queue and the devices aren't at the front.
What's happening is that we're focusing our attention on other new medicines. So we'll always have medicines that we'd want to fund. So these medicines are things that we're interested in, devices, and we're looking to fund them when we have money available.
That's despite the government giving Pharmac a $200 million boost over the next 4 years. Though the devices are publicly funded in Australia, the UK and other countries. And they're easy to get your hands on here. Anyone can purchase a device if they have the money. That's why Aroha Retreat co-founder Damien Shaparo sees no issue with non-diabetics using them.
Most certainly diabetics should have first dibs. I'm not aware of any shortages at this point. Type 1 to type 2 to just a regular person, we all benefit from better nutrition choices and better lifestyle choices.
But this doesn't sit well with Jess Barton, who says it's insulting to see CGMs used by non-diabetics.
Then it's like using up the stock for people that could potentially be using it. So if that's money that's causing that issue for stopping us being able to use it, then I can understand that frustration.
The Minister of Health, Andrew Little, declined to be interviewed, but told RNZ in a statement he hasn't received any further advice from Pharmac. Mō te hōtaka o te yahi, ko Louise Tanuth, aho.
It is 14 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, after 6 tonight, the union representing MIQ workers wants them to get more money for keeping the country safe. And a lot of you have been getting in touch about the rules around vaccination and the fact that the Prime Minister of the government's given frontline workers until the end of the month to get vaccinated or they will be moved on, redeployed. This person writes, the risk of an unvaccinated worker causing millions of dollars of losses to New Zealand companies and other responsible employees is huge. Just get the vaccine or resign. Adrian says, why can an employer compel an employee to wear a hard hat but not to be vaccinated? The risk of the latter is potentially way greater than the former. Illogically, surely, whatever the legality, says Adrian. End of the month is good, says this listener. COVID is a serious disease. Get vaccinated or move out of the front line. It is not a joke. Steve is straight to the point. No jab, no job. Cheers, says Steve. On the Māori Party and the fact that it's been referred to police for not declaring, a considerable hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of donations, we spoke to Shay Wilson, the party president. On Twitter, Shane Tapo's got in contact and says, who signed off on the return? I see volunteers being blamed. Don't blame those in the wharekai. Who was the head of the pai, says Shane. Thanks for your feedback. Do keep it coming. Text us on 2101. Early childhood service owners are wary of plans for a squad to investigate potential fraud and safety failures. The Education Ministry is reinstating the Provider Assessment Group, which ceased operations nearly 6 months ago after a 3-year pilot. During that time, the group made surprise spot checks on home-based early learning services, shutting down about 17 sites. Here's our education correspondent, John Gerritsen.
The Provider Assessment Group was a bit of a secret. Sector leaders didn't even know it existed until RNZ reported it just over a year ago. Now it's making a comeback, with the ministry close to appointing a manager to lead a new version of the unit. Early childhood teacher and campaigner Susan Bates says there's a real need for the unit, but it has to listen to teachers because they can blow the whistle on bad practice.
Certainly teachers have been asking for it for a long time. I'm still getting the feeling that the ministry isn't listening to teachers. There's a group here in Auckland who it's taken a lot of courage for them to go to the ministry, and the ministry's been into the centre and not talked to the teachers at all. It's only spoken to the owners and gone away, and the teachers are left wondering, well, what happens now?
Susan Bates says the first iteration of the unit was too brutal in its approach, and the new version needs to treat teachers with more respect. Sarah Alexander from Child Forum, an early childhood advocacy group, says the unit is good news.
This Provider Assessment Group is going to be utterly, totally vital to lifting both the quality and the standards of early childhood services, hoping that it's not going to be confined only to home base, as it was in the pilot, hoping that it will be extended to teacher-led early childhood centres as well, because there are multiple issues there.
But Peter Reynolds from the Early Childhood Council, which represents hundreds of early learning services, says he's hesitant to support a unit that could be characterised as a hit squad. He says there's a place for surprise spot checks, but the group needs to focus on truly bad operators, not minor shortcomings in paperwork.
We've seen examples of the ministry's assertiveness in this space, where they're picking on services because they've got a word in the wrong place of a policy, and that doesn't make any sense at all.
He says centre owners have complained about the ministry's approach.
You really don't want to see an official come in through the door and saying, look, I'm here from the Ministry of Education, now let's see what we can find, because that sort of implies that it's a fishing expedition. And I don't believe that there's actually any centre across the country where if somebody is motivated to go and find something that they're not doing right, something won't be found.
Kathy Wolfe from Early Childhood New Zealand, Te Rito Maioha, which also represents centres, says the group needs to be fair.
It depends on how they're going to operate this group. There could absolutely be benefits of a group of this nature. It will just be really how the process will be carried out and what the requirements will be for this group, the actual terms of reference.
The Education Ministry says it's hiring a manager for the unit, after which it will appoint 12 staff, 9 of whom will be based in the ministry's regional offices. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko John Gerritsen tēnei.
The largest nurses' union doesn't want non-clinical health workers to plug the shortage of Māori nurses and doctors involved in the COVID vaccine rollout. Community health workers at Māori health providers will be trained to give the jab because there's not enough nurses and doctors. The New Zealand Nurses Organisation says they're at risk because they don't have backing from a professional body if anything goes wrong. Miriana Johnson has more.
It's a move that's been lauded by Māori health providers. They say by using non-clinical Māori health workers, such as kaiawhina or kaimanaki, they can overcome vaccine hesitancy and get to hard-to-reach places. But the New Zealand Nurses Organisation isn't behind it. Its kaiwhakahaere Kiri Nuku says it's putting these workers in a precarious position.
We only need these unregulated workforce to have knowledge of the safety and effect and have clinical interpersonal skills. I'm not sure that we have a workforce, non-regulated, that is able to do that. And we're concerned about the protection of this non-regulated workforce.
She's concerned they don't have adequate medical training, even if they're well-versed in how to give the jab. And she says using kaiawhina is a stopgap for years of underinvestment in Māori health providers by the ministry.
We've already said that there's up to 25% pay gap between regulated nurses that work within DHBs and their colleagues that work within Māori iwi providers. Creating this second level of unregulated vaccinators will create yet a further inequity gap in terms of payment, support and clinical practice.
GP and Te Rōpū Whakakaupapa Uruta member Rawiri Jansen agrees the Ministry of Health needs to invest more in training Māori nurses. However, he says non-clinical Māori staff giving the jab won't be unprotected.
I'm really confident that the training program and the settings that we will use non-regulated trained workers will be safe for patients and it's safe for those workers. They will be working in vaccination centres where there are registered nurses who have been trained in the use of adrenaline and so on. They will be working under the direction of other health professionals.
Gisborne-based provider Turanga Health is also confident clinical staff working alongside kaiawhina will provide the necessary expertise and protection. Its Chief Executive Rewiti Ropiha says kaiawhina add value.
They bring a tacit skill set which is developed over time around the life skills, their connections, and not necessarily can you just go and buy those off a shelf. And so we're looking to bring those skill sets right to the forefront of the largest pandemic vaccination program in New Zealand's history.
Meanwhile, the government said in a 2016 report it needed to recruit 10,000 nurses by 2030 to keep up with the population. And Ms Nuku says they're well short.
We're nowhere near that number. So this seems to be quite a rushed opportunity to fix a gap. But this in no way is a long-term sustainable option.
The Ministry of Health has been approached for comment. Mo te hōtaka o te aiahi nei, ko Miriana Johnson, DNA.
Daily COVID cases in India have reached a record high as a 2-week ban on arrivals from the country begins. More than 150,000 cases and 800 deaths were recorded on Sunday. The ABC's South Asia correspondent James Oaten has been inside a COVID-19 ICU ward in one of India's hardest hit cities.
This is the epicentre of India's COVID crisis, the worst hit city in the worst hit state. Here at a wholesale food market, work must go on as the virus continues to silently spread, infecting residents at record rates.
I am worried about contracting the virus, but poor people like us can't sit at home. We'll starve to death if we sit at home.
There are partial lockdowns and an evening curfew in Nagpur, but it hasn't been enough to bend the curve. 1 in 3 tests are coming back positive.
In spite of having a better knowledge of the disease, in spite of having better treatment protocols, we are still in a bad shape.
To see the severity of the problem, we're going inside a COVID intensive care unit at a private hospital. I'm covered head to toe in protective gear before venturing in. The ward is at capacity. Nurses and doctors work tirelessly. The medical equipment is world class, but for some patients, it won't be enough.
This is like a 78 years man who's unlikely to survive.
It's not just the elderly here. This woman fighting for life is only 33. She gave birth just over a week ago.
Now we have patients who are coming from all the age groups. We're seeing patients as old as 14 years old.
Doctors say they're in this situation because people acted foolishly after the first wave, with mass gatherings and poor COVID protocols. But there's something different this time. The virus is seemingly more aggressive. Relapses are increasingly frequent.
However, there are people who are getting reinfections. So probably there is some immune invasion happening here with this type of virus.
1 in 5 samples in this state are the newly discovered variant described by officials as a double mutant. It has the characteristics of 2 already identified variants.
There can be a big gap between private and public hospitals in India, but even if you have the money to access the private system, there's no guarantee that'll help. This week, every single private hospital in Nagpur ran out of spare ventilators.
All the beds have been exhausted. Only if a patient succumbs, a ventilator bed is becoming available for those who need it.
In the public system, it's even worse, as COVID patients have been forced to share beds. Families wait outside this hospital for days to hear about their loved ones inside. The news can be grim.
Every ambulance or hearse that leaves this ICU building frightens us. We wonder, who is that inside? Is it our loved one?
Patients come here for treatment, but there are no beds available for them. Sometimes they cry, they beg, but they can't find beds.
Those suffering the disease have a simple yet important message.
Take all precautions, wear masks, sanitise hands regularly, and do not take COVID lightly.
India's vaccination program has been more about saving lives than stopping the spread. Only frontline workers and those aged over 45 can get the jab. Given the scale of the disaster, there's increasing pressure to open it up to everyone. But reported shortages in this state and others show that's easier said than done.
And a quick update on the traffic situation. State Highway 2 between the Hutt Valley and Wairarapa is still closed because of a serious crash. There's no detour, so people are being urged to delay their journey. There's also been a serious crash on State Highway 1 in Huapai in northwest Auckland, and a detour is in place there. Some of your feedback before the news at 6 on the MIQ border workers. This person says end of month is good. That's the deadline for them to get jabs or move to other jobs. COVID is a serious disease. Get vaccinated or move out of the front line. It is not a joke, this person says. On Louise Tanutha's story about diabetes monitoring, a monitor that goes onto a person's arm and the struggle to get funding for that. This listener says the cost of the long-term effects of type 2 diabetes is around $300 million a year. Funding CGM would actually save money for the government.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leātaua tēnei. More than 500 MIQ workers remain unvaccinated despite all being given the opportunity. A third worker at the Grand Millennium facility in Auckland, another security worker, has tested positive for COVID-19 and is not vaccinated. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern has confirmed there are 4,010 MIQ workers and 3,472 have been vaccinated. This leaves 538 unvaccinated. She says MIQ employers need to have all workers vaccinated by the end of the month.
They, of course, know the urgency we place on them ensuring that 100% of their workforce are vaccinated. Otherwise, they will need to withdraw those workers who are currently in our MIQ facility.
Jacinda Ardern says 81% of the 170 Grand Millennium workers are vaccinated, which means 32 are not protected. The Māori Party president says the mistake is not declaring more than $300,000 in donations was picked up just a month ago. Donations above $30,000 must be declared to the Electoral Commission within 10 working days. The party received money above that threshold between March and October last year. The president, Shay Wilson, says he told the Commission about the error as soon as he realised.
Everything finishes with me, but our team, we did it together, and
Yeah, that's my mistake.
The party has been referred to the police for the breach. The Early Childhood Council has reservations about the reinstatement of a special unit investigating high-risk early learning services. The ministry is setting up the group following a 3-year pilot which ended in October last year. Peter Reynolds told the council he agrees the ministry should make surprise visits to early childhood centres, but he worries the unit will punish providers for minor problems with their paperwork.
We've seen examples of the ministry's assertiveness in this space where they're picking on services because they've got a word in the wrong place of a policy. And that doesn't make any sense at all.
Peter Reynolds says early childhood services should also have the right to appeal the new unit's findings. The Health Minister Andrew Little has shot down calls for a swift overhaul of drug laws, saying any major change would first have to go back to a referendum. A host of health and social organisations have signed an open letter to the government asking for drug use to be treated as a health issue, not a criminal one. But Mr Little says the government is constrained by last year's public vote, which went against cannabis legalisation. He says a wider public debate and discussion is needed before any further liberalisation of drug law. And Mr Little says he believes the public would also expect another vote, but declined to put a time frame on when that could occur. A former government official has been tasked with reviewing New Zealand's military exports controls. It follows revelations the Foreign Ministry approved exports of military goods to countries leading a military intervention in Yemen. Mackenzie Smith reports.
The export controls regime has come under intense scrutiny after RNZ revealed military exports were being approved to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade is standing by the export permits, but it says its review will look at all areas of export controls. It says its appointee David Small brings expertise to the review, given he led the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment from 2012 to 2017. No timeline has been set. Call Mackenzie Smith, TNA.
The Prime Minister has signed the Book of Condolences for Prince Philip, paying tribute to his life of service. This afternoon, she announced a state memorial service will be held in Wellington at 3 p.m. on Wednesday, April the 21st. Jacinda Ardern says Prince Philip visited New Zealand 4 times on his own. A plea is being made for the return of a sculpture taken from the ruins of Christchurch's Catholic Cathedral. The marble work by late Christchurch sculptor Lou Summers depicts one of the 14 Stations of the Cross. The other sculptures in the series have all been retrieved from the cathedral, which is being demolished after being badly damaged in the 2011 earthquakes. The artist's partner, Robin Webster, says they are offering a reward for information that leads to its return.
I'm hoping that someone thought that they were all going to be demolished and they got in there and they saved it, thinking perhaps they were all going to be trashed, and they perhaps thought, well, if I get in there and grab one, then that will save it.
Robin Webster is hopeful the works might find a new home in a rebuilt cathedral. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. Silver Ferns captain Amelia Ignacio's participation in netball's ANZ Premiership competition for the defending champion Pulse is in doubt. Ignacio sat out last month's pre-season tournament as the franchise rested their star goal attack. Pulse captain Claire Kirsten says they're giving Ignacio time, and she's not sure when her New Zealand teammate will be back on the court.
We're hoping that she'll be back with us. There's still a bit of wait and see on that, and I guess our commitment is just in supporting her and when she's ready.
The Pulse face the Northern Stars in the opening game of the ANZ Premiership on Sunday afternoon. All Blacks captain Sam Cane has hailed his surgery as a success. Cane had an operation on Friday after suffering a pectoral muscle injury in the Chiefs' Super Rugby Aotearoa match against the Blues last month. In a post on Instagram, Cane says surgery went well and he's grateful to have had a very good surgeon who reattached the muscle and tied up a few loose ends with his shoulder while he was in there. Cane is expected to be sidelined for between 4 and 6 months. 5-time Masters champion Tiger Woods has led the plaudits for Hideki Matsuyama. Matsuyama has become the first Japanese golfer to pull on the Masters champions green jacket at Augusta after finishing 1 shot clear of the field. Woods has tweeted his congratulations and says Matsuyama's win will impact the entire golf world. Woods missed the first men's major tournament of the year as he's recovering from serious leg injuries suffered in a car crash in February. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, we continue our oral history series, Kei Roto i Te Miru.
Inside the bubble, stories of ordinary Kiwis living through an extraordinary lockdown. Vinnie Wiley looks back on the weekend sport from a Pacific perspective. James Littlewood from Auckland's Going West Festival. Apparently it's going video too. And we have a sofa session with the Kiwi klezmer outfit, the Kugels, on Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki including Taupo. Mostly cloudy with isolated showers, Coromandel Peninsula, Bay of Plenty and Rotorua. Cloudy with occasional rain becoming mainly fine tomorrow afternoon. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa. A few showers about the ranges and 1 or 2 spreading further east. Rain in Gisborne for a time tomorrow morning. Whanganui to Wellington including Taihape. Fine spells. Isolated showers becoming widespread for a time tomorrow afternoon. Marlborough and Nelson, a few showers about western Nelson spreading elsewhere tonight, possibly heavy tomorrow afternoon, then clearing. Bulla, Westland and Fiordland rain with squally thunderstorms and hail possible, especially in Westland, clearing south of Hokitika later tomorrow. Canterbury and Otago also southland, scattered rain or showers becoming widespread and persistent about Otago and inland southland tomorrow afternoon. And Chatham Islands, low cloud and rain at times. RNZ National, it's almost 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint. Ko Lisa Owen taku ingoa. Health authorities are scrambling to work out how COVID-19 spread between workers at Auckland's Grand Millennium Managed Isolation Hotel. Last night, officials announced that a third worker at the hotel has tested positive for COVID-19. It's now stopped any new returnees entering the country's largest MIQ facility. Jean Bell reports.
So far, 3 Grand Millennium workers have contracted COVID-19. Case A is a cleaner who tested positive for the virus on 21st March. Case B is a security guard who tested positive last week. And last night, Case C, also a security guard who works with Case B, was announced. The Director General of Health, Dr. Ashley Bloomfield, says Case C and their partner, who has tested negative, are in a quarantine facility.
This latest case had already been identified as a close contact, was in isolation, initial test was negative, and it's the subsequent day 5 test that has returned positive. So the person has been in isolation during their infectious period.
Dr. Bloomfield says case A and B are genomically identical, which suggests direct transmission of the virus between them. But there's a long gap between when they got the virus, and authorities don't know whether Case A gave Case B the virus or if there's another missing link.
They both worked at the Grand Millennium, we know, and we're just looking at their shift patterns to see if there was a crossover there to find that connection and to find out if there could be any intermediary between Case A and B, given the time period.
COVID-19 modeller Sean Hendy says the virus is often spread through casual contact.
Generally, what we find is there's just some casual contact between cases that leads to the infection rather than from surfaces. Nonetheless, you can't rule that out.
Dr. Ashley Bloomfield says both cases B and C have not received the COVID-19 vaccination.
However, there is no suggestion that they are vaccine hesitant or don't want to be vaccinated.
He says Case C wants to be vaccinated, but had not been able to get one yet, possibly due to being in isolation. MIQ Head Brigadier Jim Bliss says an audit of the Grand Millennium has not flagged anything of concern. Mr. Bliss says the technical advisory group will meet tomorrow to make any recommendations for the facility outside of the audit. He says CCTV footage is being checked, along with who was on site and which staff were rostered on.
We are now focusing on establishing the cause of infection for our staff.
Meanwhile, the Auckland suburb of Mount Roskill is the hotspot for locations of interest. Between 29th March and 7th April, Case B visited Bake and Beans, Bikanavala Dairy, White Swan Mobile, Terminus Dairy and local barber, all in the Mount Roskill area. The person also visited Funtech on Queen Street. All locations relate to Case B, not the most recent Case C, as they were isolating. Terminus Dairy owner Nitin Patel says he found out on Sunday afternoon that the person had visited his Mount Roskill shop 4 times. He has cleaned his store and will be getting a COVID-19 test as a precaution as he lives with his young son and elderly parents.
I know certain things that I need to do it to keep myself safe, my family safe and the community safe.
Case B also visited Bake and Beans. Bakery owner Shelley Rana says he will be keeping a close eye on the health of his staff.
Do the temperature every morning, each and every staff, and we're watching it. If someone's sick, then we're not allowed to work.
A pop-up testing centre at the War Memorial Hall in Mount Roskill will be open tomorrow until Friday. Mō te hotaka o te ahi nei, ko Jeanbao tēnei.
The union representing some MIQ workers wants them to get more than thanks for keeping the country safe. They'd like a pay rise too. As you heard, 2 security guards working at the Grand Millennium Isolation Hotel have caught COVID in the latest outbreak, and that follows on from a cleaner at the same facility and others who have been exposed to the virus in their employment. Today, the Prime Minister again thanked workers for their efforts on the front line, but not all 32 of the MIQ facilities are paying the living wage. The National Secretary for the Unite Union is John Crocker, and he joins us now. John, who's paying what?
Good question. The ministry actually won't tell us who isn't paying the living wage. They've cited commercial sensitivity. So they've given us the numbers. 27 of the facilities are paying at or near the living wage. The last 5 are not. We think that'll be pretty close to the minimum wage.
So can you explain in a bit more detail why they won't tell you which 5 facilities are not paying the living wage?
Well, that's difficult because they're not giving me a lot of information about why they're not telling me. They've basically cited commercial sensitivity, so these people are under contract to the government, and the terms of those contracts are sensitive, I guess, confidential, so they won't identify the 5 who have chosen not to pay their staff the living wage.
Could you not work it out from a process of elimination and talking to the workers?
Almost. So look, we don't represent 32 facilities. Out of the facilities where we have workers, we represent all but 1 paying the living wage, so we know who that is. The other 4 are from non-unionised work sites, so we can't conclusively determine who the other 4 are.
Okay, so what do you make of the fact that there are, 5 facilities who are not prepared to pay the living wage?
We think it's pretty disappointing at this stage. The contracts have come up again. April was the cutoff, so we know that they're on the next round. And this is, it's disappointing on a number of levels. Firstly, if 27 facilities can, then these 5 can really. They're just choosing not to. Secondly, this is government policy that contracted government workers will be on the living wage. They've had the opportunity to fix this. We've been making noise for months in the media, in meetings with the ministry, saying you guys need to do this. And it's pretty disappointing that that they're not on the living wage. These last 5 standouts, and we really question. If they can't manage to pay the living wage, should they have these contracts? Should they be entrusted to keep us safe if they can't find a way to pay their staff the living wage?
So what are you suggesting, John? Ditch the hotels from the government contracts that don't pay up to the mark and get new ones?
Oh, well, what I've been insisting for a while is that the government needed to insist in those contracts that came up in April that they pay the living wage. They needed to make it conditional. If it was honestly a funding error, then the government could just put a few more dollars in so that these workers can, live with dignity. I think they need to re-examine these contracts. I think they need to go back in, and if they've concluded a contract, say, look, we'll give you a few extra bucks, just pay your workers a living wage. They've had the opportunity to insist. I think they now need to go back in and step up. Look, if there are other facilities out there that are able to do this job and they want those contracts, then perhaps they should. But I'm concerned about the workers that are out there right now.
You know that the counter-argument will be that this whole COVID thing is costing billions of dollars. What they charge for MIQ from people returning doesn't actually cover the full cost, and that would just be another financial burden, adding an extra top-up on that.
Yes, but, the government has borrowed billions and billions of dollars to fund this. We're all okay in general with the principles, and we're talking about a small amount of money for a lot of workers, and they're keeping us safe. And look, what we saw from last year, we saw who's actually essential. During lockdown, the level 4, we found out who actually keeps society going, and all of those people should all be on the living wage. This is an ethical principle, plus it's government policy.
So what do you think when the Prime Minister says thanks, as she has done a few times? She said thanks again today. It's genuine, isn't it?
It is genuine, and it's nice. It's nice to hear these workers do appreciate the thanks they receive and the support from the community, but they also face stigma from their community. They take a lot of steps in their own life to keep their friends and family safer. And It's tough out there. They might have had their hours reduced. A lot of these workers went through restructures. They might have partners who've lost their jobs. Rents are still going up. Saying thanks is appreciated, but it doesn't pay the rent.
Do any of them get paid extra allowances, for want of a better phrase? Are they getting danger or risk money for the work that they're doing?
Well, we have a problem with danger and risk money because we believe that under the health and safety framework, every worker should be kept as safe as possible. The way that some of these pay increases have been framed from a contractual point of view is that it is an allowance while the facility is under contract to the government to provide MIQ services.
So you would have a problem with that from the point of view that it would go once, presumably, people are vaccinated and they don't regard COVID as the risk that it currently is?
Well, yes, we will have a problem with that. The workers won't appreciate having their pay cut, but we understand why the raise is in there now, and we appreciate that it is in there now. We don't want this tied to risk, but we do want to see everybody getting a living wage in this situation.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's the National Secretary for the Unite Union, John Crocker. It is almost 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Officials who opened a new justice facility in Auckland this morning did so with a promise that it will have made a significant difference by this time next year. The Māori-based service is at Oranga Tamariki's existing care and protection facility for 10 to 16-year-olds called Whakatapa Pokai in South Auckland suburb of Weymouth. It's hoped to give teens with difficult upbringings a chance at turning their lives around before they reoffend. Katie Todd was at the opening.
The sound of waiata this morning as the new youth justice arm of Whakataka Pokai was opened. It's a much warmer welcome than the facility received when it was first proposed. People living nearby in Weymouth were quick to point out there's already 3 other correctional facilities within 4 kilometres. They told RNZ they were worried about crime and potential escapees, putting neighbouring families and children at risk. Today at the opening, Associate Children's Minister Poto Williams said a lot of work had been done to smooth the pathway and ensure the facility isn't just tolerated but welcomed.
If we can get the community to not only have the facility but to welcome it here because they know that the work that is going to happen here is so important, I thank you for getting us to that place. Not an easy job.
Oranga Tamariki says the facility will be quite unlike the others nearby, offering intense and wraparound support for 15 young offenders at a time, with a less institutional feel. It's been designed with input from Waikato Taunui Mana Whenua. Oranga Tamariki's Head of Youth Justice Alan Borum says staff will be using a Māori evidence-based approach, one that involves working with whānau and looking back to look forward.
There won't be many young people in here. That's because the backgrounds that they come from will be incredibly challenging, and we have to be able to give all the focus and effort that we can to make sure that they're able to turn their lives around.
Vulnerable teenage boys and girls will be referred to Whakataka Pokai after being remanded or sentenced by the Youth Court. Children's Minister Kelvin Davis says the intention is to break that cycle of crime, stop them reoffending and get them out of the justice system for good.
By the time a young person comes to the attention of youth justice, it's really their first offence, and that's even more likely when they come into a residential setting. So they need a lot of help, as do their whānau.
Kelvin Davis says Whakataka Pokai is a place the local community can be proud of.
In a year's time, I hope I can be back here with Kaimahi and the community, and we can all be humbled by the difference that Whakataka Pokai has made in the lives of young people.
Alan Borum says he's committed to making sure that happens. The facility is the first of 100 new youth justice beds promised by the government since the age of youth justice was raised to 18 in 2019. For Checkpoint, ko Katie Todd, TNA.
The Prime Minister's announced a state memorial service for the Duke of Edinburgh will be held in Wellington next week. It'll take place at 3 p.m. on Wednesday the 21st of April, which is also the Queen's birthday. It's as Prince Philip and the Queen's children open up about the loss of their father. The BBC's Nicholas Witchell reports.
On a day of pause and reflection, prayers for the Duke were said in many church services. And after the service at the Chapel of All Saints in Windsor Great Park, members of his family spoke about him.
It's a great loss. I think the way I would put it is that
we've lost almost the grandfather of the nation. And I feel very sorry and supportive of my mother, who's feeling it, I think, probably more than everybody else. She described it as having left a huge void in her life. But we, the family, the ones that are closer, are rallying round to make sure that we're there to support her.
The Earl and Countess of Wessex also spoke about how the Queen was dealing with the loss.
Thinking of others before herself. She's
as always,
amazing.
Yes.
Yeah.
But bearing up. But again, you know, it's just that wave of affection for him, and just those lovely stories. They just mean so much, and you know, the tributes have been just fantastic, and that's really, really important, and we really do appreciate it. So,
and I think it's so lovely for so many people to learn about what he did, because I think quite a lot of things that have come out will have surprised some people.
The Countess spoke to members of the congregation about the manner of the Duke's death.
It was right for him. It was so gentle.
She said his passing had been very, very peaceful, as if someone had taken him by the hand and off he went.
Nicholas Witcher with that report. The US is now a well-oiled vaccination machine with almost 200 million doses given to the public. The country is moving at 5 times the global average for vaccinations, yet the danger is far from over, particularly in the state of Michigan, which is moving to suppress yet another surge of COVID-19. Here's CNN's Paolo Sandoval.
From COVID-19 positivity rates not seen since the start of the pandemic to hospitalizations nearing December peak levels, it's not getting any better in the Wolverine state.
With pandemic fatigue, with the unique challenge here in Michigan of a very anti-coronavirus movement with about half of our population, people who don't want to wear masks, don't want to distance, I think getting vaccine shots in arms is our ultimate defense.
Repeated calls from Michigan leaders to the Biden administration asking to increase their vaccine allotments have been unsuccessful so far.
In every conversation we're having at every level of the federal government, we are asking for more help, for more vaccines.
Hoping to help curb the rise in outbreaks, Governor Gretchen Whitmer asked high schools to go remote, youth sports to pause, and people skip indoor dining for at least the next 2 weeks.
Please redouble your efforts.
But these are only recommendations, insists the governor, not the mandated sweeping shutdowns from a year ago that made her the subject of criticism and even death threats.
What's happening in Michigan today could be what's happening in other states tomorrow, and so it's on all of us to recognize if we can squash where we're seeing hot spots, it's in everyone's best interest.
Andy Witkowski, a Detroit area special education teacher, wants to see a more aggressive move from his state leaders, perhaps make those requests requirements.
I think it fell short that she didn't mandate it. I think the reason our numbers are spiked is because we've opened up, schools are back. They haven't had an uptick in the sports here.
Other Michiganders, like Leah Fairbanks, stand behind the governor's approach.
Whitmer's a rock star. You know, she's doing her best. It's a pandemic. When it comes down to it, people are either going to take care of themselves and take care of each other, or they're not.
Jordan Ross is frustrated that his peers are choosing not to.
I'm seeing a lot of students, they know the issues that are going on, but they're still choosing to either go out and hang out with friends or go to Florida or things like that. So that's kind of concerning to me.
The state's chief medical executive says nearly 1,000 COVID-19 outbreaks are being traced in Michigan, linked to indoor dining, bars, youth sporting events, and K-12 classes.
Our public health system is overwhelmed. We are not able to get information on many cases, nor are we able to identify their close contacts.
Paolo Sandoval with that report in Michigan. After a slow start to its vaccination program, Germany is now giving a record number of jabs. The ramped-up rollout comes at an important time. The country is struggling to contain a third wave of the pandemic, and a patchwork of restrictions are in place across the country. But there's another challenge for authorities. At the fringes of German society, there's a movement which doesn't believe the science behind the vaccines, and it's been recruiting children. Jessica Bateman reports from central Germany.
It seemed more like a funfair than a protest. And at first glance, the people marching in seemed pretty normal.
So why are you here today?
Well, because I'm really worried about the future, my own future, but especially my son's future. For children,
Two are living in the US, and the other two are south of Germany, and so we live in the middle of Germany. And now with the lockdown, we couldn't go.
Among the crowd of 20,000 people were supporters of the Querdenken movement. The English translation is lateral thinking. They're anti-lockdown, anti-vaccine, and some of them are even anti-mask.
My German's not quite good enough to know what he was saying. Did he want me to take my mask off?
It's fine. Some people are just...
Yeah.
I got out before trouble kicked off, but the rally in Kassel later turned violent. It's not just adults like the ones I spoke to who are involved in the Querdenken movement. They're recruiting young people. Through an inside source who goes by the name Datenliebe, we gained access to his secret group. Datenliebe described what children and teenagers are discussing. We've had an actor voice his words because he's worried about his safety.
They say pretty clearly that they either don't think that corona exists or that the pandemic is not real. They say it's just a flu. They have a strong disbelief in state institutions.
The man behind the group is a charismatic former preacher named Samuel Eckert. Eckert runs a public channel for adults. It's one of the most popular German groups on the chat app Telegram. And children, some as young as 10 years old, are filtered into a private group. Experts say Eckert is preying on worried parents and grandparents, and that far-right sentiments are trickling down to the kids on Telegram.
And that was Jessica Bateman with that story. Hideki Matsuyama has become the first Japanese man to win a golf major after triumphing at the Masters. His main challenges fell by the wayside throughout the day at Augusta, yet a tense finish meant the 29-year-old would claim victory by only a single shot. Here's the BBC's Andy Swiss.
A moment of victory and history. For Hideki Matsuyama and for Japan, a first Masters title, but not without a little drama. It had seemed a victory procession. Matsuyama was 4 clear with just 4 holes left, but then he found the water and his playing partner Xander Schauffele found a birdie. Suddenly the American was just 2 behind, but at the very next hole it was Schauffele's turn to make a costly error and his hopes disappeared with it. Still, it wasn't over, though, as the unheralded Will Zalatoris posted a target, some performance on his Masters debut. But after his wobble, Matsuyama held his nerve and tapped in for triumph. The celebrations might have been understated, but the achievement was huge. The first Japanese man to win any major championship, a moment for him and for his country to savour.
Congratulations, Hideki. Thanks.
And that report was by the BBC's Andy Swiss. Now, before we go, an update on the crash on State Highway 2 between the Hutt Valley and Wairarapa. Police say the road near Kaitoki is now partially open after a crash. One person has been taken to Wellington Hospital following the crash and remains in a serious condition. So do take care out there. Don't forget, you can catch up on all our stories online, particularly the video ones. Last word to this person about security guards, saying the problems with privately contracted security guards in MOQ wouldn't have arisen if the Prime Minister had brought them under government employment. Back tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Prime Minister says all the 538 unvaccinated MIQ staff must be inoculated by the end of April or moved off the front line. The government is making it compulsory for companies to register when their border workers have been tested for COVID-19. The Green Party is accusing the Health Minister of abdicating responsibility and saying another referendum is needed before any reform of drug laws. Early childhood teachers and advocates are welcoming the Education Ministry's reinstatement of a special unit to investigate high-risk early learning services. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I think with a majority government, they could be doing so much more than they are, and I think our process shows that they have the support from Kiwis to be doing more on climate change.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news.
There's a cool connection with this song in the last show that we did together because Alistair was in $100 Band with Maxine Funke, whose song I brought to the table last time.
Up to date if you're up late. Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Thanks, Karen. I'm Brian Crump, getting ready for another night on RNZ National. My first guests are a band, a klezmer band. I hope I'm saying that right, but I'll check with them shortly. The Kugels, they will entertain you for the first half hour of Nights After the News at 7. In this half hour, later on, an interview that's been getting a lot of clicks, an interview that Jim Mora did with Alison George, talking about cold water swimming. Now, I think what they mean by